The lights were already too bright when it happened, the kind of studio glare that makes smiles feel painted on and laughter sound rehearsed. What was supposed to be a safe, sunny daytime conversation suddenly cracked open. And in that split second, Chris Pratt stopped playing along. This was the moment daytime TV lost control. Subscribe to Prime Tale right now and hit like if you want stories they never planned to let you see. Drop a comment because what happens next will divide everyone watching. Chris sat in the chair with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 100 times. Legs relaxed, hands folded, that familiar half-grin ready to deploy on cue. The audience loved him for it. The approachable movie star, the guy who laughed at himself, who told Jim jokes and dad stories. Across from him, Sunny Hostin held her cards close, posture sharp, eyes alert. She wasn't here to laugh. She was here to ask the question everyone pretended not to be thinking about. The conversation started soft. Too soft. A clip rolled on the screen behind them, an action sequence, explosions blooming like fireworks. Applause swelled. Chris nodded, waved, thanked the crowd. He spoke about the role, the training, the gratitude. His voice was calm, almost soothing, the kind that made you trust him. Sunny listened, smiling politely, waiting. Producers in the control room relaxed. This was going exactly as planned. Then Sunny leaned forward just an inch. "So, Chris," she said, tone measured, friendly but precise. "You've been in the headlines a lot lately, not for movies, but for what you say. Or don't say." The air shifted. Chris's smile tightened, barely noticeable, but the camera caught it. He chuckled, a light sound meant to deflect. "That's the world we live in, right," he said. Headlines got a headline. A ripple of laughter passed through the audience, but it didn't reach Sunny's eyes. "Some fans," she continued, "feel you choose silence when your voice could matter most. Especially when it comes to social issues." Chris inhaled slowly. Inside, a familiar tension crept up his spine, the feeling of being boxed in, of every word already judged before it left his mouth. He adjusted in his seat. "I think people can care deeply and still choose privacy," he said carefully. "Not everything has to be a statement." Sunny nodded, but she didn't let go. "But when you have millions listening," she replied, "isn't silence also a statement?" That was the moment the studio grew quiet. No laughter. No clapping. Even the band seemed to freeze. Chris looked out at the audience, then back at Sunny. His jaw flexed. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, the familiar frustration of being told who he should be, what he should say, how loud he should say it. "I don't agree with that," he said, voice still controlled, but firmer now. "I'm an actor. I tell stories. That's my job." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "But you're more than that to your fans. You're a role model whether you like it or not." Something flickered across Chris's face, annoyance, then something deeper. Hurt, maybe. The cameras zoomed in, sensing blood in the water. He leaned forward now, mirroring her posture. "I never asked to be anyone's moral compass," he said. "And I think it's unfair to demand that from people just because they are visible." A few audience members clapped, hesitant, scattered. Others stayed silent. Sunny didn't flinch. "Visibility comes with responsibility," she said. "Especially when people feel affected by the issues you avoid." Avoid. That word landed hard. Chris laughed again, but this time it was sharp, humorless. "Avoid," he repeated. "You think I'm avoiding something." The tension was palpable now, like a wire pulled too tight. Somewhere off camera, a producer gestured frantically, whispering into a headset. "Move on. Wrap it up." But Sunny pressed on. "I think people want honesty," she said. "And sometimes honesty means taking a stand, even if it's uncomfortable." Chris's smile vanished completely. His shoulders squared. The friendly movie star facade slipped, just enough to reveal the man underneath, tired of being cornered on live television. "You're putting me in a box," he said, voice rising. "You're assuming my values because I don't perform them on cue." Sunny opened her mouth to respond, but he didn't stop. "No, let me finish," he said, holding up a hand. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daytime TV didn't do interruptions like this. "I care about people. I care about my family. I care about doing good in the world. But I'm not going to turn my life into a soundbite so someone else can feel satisfied." The studio was dead silent now. You could hear the hum of the lights, the faint rustle of someone shifting in their seat. Sunny stared at him, eyes wide but steady. "So you're saying," she said slowly, "that accountability is just performance?" Chris shook his head, frustration boiling over. I'm saying this, stop telling people they are failing because they don't live the way you want them to, or speak the way you demand. That's not dialogue. That's control. The word hung there. Control. A murmur spread through the audience, half shock, half awe. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't safe. This was raw, and it was happening live. Sunny took a breath, clearly choosing her next words carefully. Chris, she said, no one is trying to control you. We're asking you to recognize your influence. He leaned back, eyes flashing. And I'm asking you to recognize my humanity. For a heartbeat, it felt like time stopped. Two worlds collided in that studio. The expectation of polished daytime debate and the messy reality of a man pushed too far. The camera cut briefly to the host's table, then back to Chris, whose chest rose and fell as he tried to steady himself. Somewhere deep down, he realized he'd crossed a line. Or maybe the line had crossed him. And as the host tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, everyone watching could feel it. This was no longer just an interview. It was a confrontation that had cracked the glossy surface of daytime TV. And it was only just beginning. The silence didn't fade, it thickened. It pressed down on the studio like a held breath, the kind that makes your ears ring. The host beside Sunny shifted in her chair, fingers tightening around her cue cards, eyes darting toward the camera as if silently asking for rescue. But the cameras stayed locked on Chris Pratt, because controversy was oxygen, and this moment was breathing hard. Chris exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders to drop. He could feel his pulse in his temples, the echo of his own words bouncing around his head. My humanity. He hadn't planned to say that. It slipped out the way truth sometimes does, unpolished, inconvenient, impossible to take back. Sunny straightened her papers, buying herself a second. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it now. No one is questioning your humanity, Chris, she said. But when people look to you and feel let down, don't you think that deserves acknowledgement? The word let down landed differently. It wasn't accusatory, it was personal. Chris looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers as if grounding himself. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered his name. Another person shook their head. I can't live my life trying not to disappoint strangers, Chris said quietly. The volume dropped, but the intensity didn't. If I do that, I stop being real. And I won't do that. A murmur rippled through the audience, approval from some, discomfort from others. Sunny nodded slowly, as if absorbing his words, but she wasn't done. Isn't that a privilege, though, she asked. To choose when to be vocal and when not to, when other people don't get that choice. Chris's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto hers, sharp now. You think I don't know what privilege is? He asked. You think I haven't checked myself 1,000 times? The control room erupted in whispers. A red light blinked. The floor manager stepped closer to the stage, hands clasped, jaw tight. This was spiraling, and everyone knew it. Sunny didn't raise her voice. That almost made it worse. Then help people understand, she said. Because right now, it feels like deflection. That was it. The restraint cracked. Chris leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice suddenly louder, rougher. I am not deflecting, he said. I'm refusing to be reduced. I'm refusing to be turned into a headline that says, Chris Pratt finally says the right thing. The audience gasped. Someone clapped, loud, isolated, defiant. Others followed, then stopped, unsure if applause was allowed here. Sunny's lips pressed into a thin line. You're on a live show, she said. This is conversation, not reduction. Then let it be a real one, Chris shot back. Because right now, it feels like a setup. That word, setup, sent a visible shock through the studio. One of the co-hosts leaned forward. Okay, let's, she began, but Sunny lifted a hand gently, stopping her. A setup. Sunny repeated. You think we brought you here to ambush you? Chris hesitated. For a split second, regret flickered across his face. But pride surged right behind it. I think these questions were designed to corner me, he said. And I think you knew exactly how this would look. The crowd buzzed now, energy spiking. This wasn't debate anymore, it was accusation. Sunny's eyes hardened, not with anger, but resolve. That's not fair, she said. And you know it. Is it? Chris replied. Because every time I sit down somewhere like this, it's the same thing. Smile, joke, then, boom, prove you're one of the good ones. The phrase hit hard. A collective inhale swept the room. Sunny leaned back slightly, studying him. You don't get to decide who's good just because you don't want to answer, she said. That's not what accountability is. Chris ran a hand through his hair, frustration spilling over. And you don't get to decide that silence equals guilt, he snapped. That's not justice. That's pressure. The temperature in the room rose. You could feel sides forming in real time, people shifting in their seats, crossing arms, nodding or shaking heads. This was no longer about Chris Pratt or Sunny Hostin. It was about expectation versus autonomy, public hunger versus private boundaries. Sunny leaned forward again, voice low but unwavering. People aren't asking for perfection, she said. They are asking for presence. Chris laughed bitterly. Presence, he echoed. I'm here. I showed up. Isn't that enough? The band director glanced nervously toward the producer. A commercial break was approaching, but cutting now would only confirm what everyone feared, that the show had lost control. Sunny held his gaze. Sometimes showing up means more than just being in the chair. That was the line. Chris stood up. The audience gasped as one. Chairs scraped softly. The cameras jolted, scrambling to reframe. Chris didn't storm off. He stood there, towering now, emotion written plainly across his face. I'm done being dissected, he said. Not shouting. Worse, steady. I came here to talk about my work. Not to be judged on a scale I didn't build. Sunny looked up at him, unflinching. And I came here to ask the questions people want answered, she said. That's my job. They stared at each other, the distance between them charged and electric. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. Finally, Chris nodded once. Then we're at an impasse, he said. He sat back down, but the damage was done. The illusion of control had shattered. The audience didn't know whether to clap, boo, or hold its breath. The host scrambled to pivot, voices suddenly too bright, too fast. But no one was listening. Because everyone could feel it now. This moment was going to follow them long after the cameras cut. And whatever happened next would decide whether this confrontation burned out or exploded. The hosts tried to smile their way out of it. A joke landed and died in midair. The band tapped out a nervous sting that sounded more like a warning than music. Somewhere, a producer counted down to commercial, but the tension refused to break. It clung to the room like smoke after a firework, thick, stinging, impossible to ignore. Chris sat back in his chair, but his body hadn't relaxed. One leg bounced uncontrollably. His hands were clasped so tight his knuckles had gone pale. He could feel 100 eyes on him, weighing him, measuring whether he'd gone too far or not far enough. This was the price of speaking honestly in a place built for Polish. Sunny took a sip of water, buying time. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but the room knew softness could cut just as deep. Chris, she said, no one here is your enemy. He let out a short breath, half laugh, half disbelief. It doesn't feel that way. The audience reacted instantly, a low wave of sound, sympathy colliding with skepticism. Sunny tilted her head slightly. Feeling attacked doesn't always mean you are, she replied. Sometimes it means something uncomfortable is being reflected back. That word, reflected, hit him harder than the accusations. Chris stared at the floor for a moment, jaw working. In his mind, flashes of past interviews blurred together. The same questions, the same expectations, the same invisible checklist he was always failing. You know what's uncomfortable, he said quietly. Being told that unless you speak the way someone wants, you're part of the problem. Sunny's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. And you know what's uncomfortable for others, she said. Watching powerful people stay quiet while they struggle. The studio leaned in. Even the air seemed to vibrate with it. This wasn't television anymore. It was confession colliding with confrontation. Chris shook his head slowly. You're assuming silence means indifference, he said. That's not true. Sometimes silence means you're still figuring things out. On a private level, that's fair, Sunny replied. But your life isn't private. There it was again. That reminder. That invisible contract he'd never signed but was expected to honor every day. So I lose either way? Chris asked, voice rising just enough to crack. If I speak, I'm performative. If I don't, I'm complicit. A beat. Then Sunny nodded once. Welcome to accountability. The word slammed into the room like a door. Chris laughed, but there was no humor in it now. The laugh died quickly, leaving behind something raw. No, he said. Accountability is answering for harm you've caused. Not for expectations you didn't meet. The crowd split audibly now, some applause, some murmurs of dissent. A woman in the front row nodded vigorously. A man behind her folded his arms, frowning. Social media, somewhere beyond the walls, was already on fire. Sunny leaned forward again. Impact matters more than intent, she said. You know that. Chris's eyes flashed. Then talk about impact honestly, he replied. Not like this. Not like it's a trial. That word, trial, hung heavy. One of the co-hosts glanced nervously towards Sunny, then back to Chris, sensing the danger. The producer's voice crackled in someone's earpiece. Wrap it. Now. Sunny inhaled, then exhaled slowly. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but there was something new in it, emotion she hadn't planned to show. You think I enjoy these moments? She asked. You think it's easy sitting here, knowing half the audience will hate me for asking these questions? Chris looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since it began. For a split second, the fight dimmed. I didn't say that, he said. But that's what moments like this turn into, Sunny continued. People picking sides instead of listening. The studio went quiet again. Chris swallowed. His shoulders sagged just a fraction, the fight draining enough to let fatigue show. I am listening, he said. I just don't like what you're asking me to become. Sunny's expression softened, just slightly. No one's asking you to become anything, she said. They're asking you to show up. Chris closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they glistened, not with tears, but with something close. I show up every day, he said. For my kids. For my work. For the people I love. And people want you to show up for them, too, Sunny replied. The pause that followed was unbearable. Seconds stretched. The audience held its breath. This was the crossroads, the moment where it could de-escalate or detonate. Chris nodded slowly. I hear that, he said. But I won't be bullied into it. Sunny stiffened. No one is bullying you. That's how it feels. He shot back, emotion flaring again. And feelings matter, right? The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the room, then faded. Sunny straightened in her chair. Then let me ask you this, she said, carefully, deliberately. What would accountability look like to you? The question caught him off guard. For the first time, Chris didn't respond immediately. He stared at her, then out at the audience, then back again. His mouth opened, then closed. Inside, his thoughts collided. Fear of being misquoted, fear of being misunderstood, fear of saying too much or too little. This was the edge of the cliff. I don't know, he admitted finally. The admission landed heavier than any argument. The audience reacted with a collective murmur, surprise, empathy, disbelief. Sunny nodded slowly. That, she said softly, might be the most honest thing you've said today. Chris leaned back, exhausted. The confrontation hadn't ended, but it had shifted. And as the camera pulled back, capturing the stunned faces, the uneasy hosts, and a room no longer pretending this was just another segment, one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, whatever was said or unsaid, would decide how this moment lived on. Not just on television, but everywhere. The break finally came, but it didn't save anyone. When the cameras cut to commercial, the studio didn't exhale. There was no laughter, no casual chatter, no relief. Crew members froze in place, headsets buzzing with overlapping voices. A producer's hand hovered in the air, unsure whether to signal calm or containment. Chris stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused, like someone who'd just survived a car crash and was only now realizing the damage. Sunny looked down at her notes, then up again, jaw set, refusing to look rattled even as the room vibrated with aftershock. When they came back live, everything looked normal. Too normal. Smiles were pasted back on. The host's voice brightened unnaturally. We're going to take a breath, she said, the word breath doing more work than it ever should on daytime television. The audience clapped on cue, but it was thin, uneven, unsure. Chris nodded politely. Sunny thanked him for being there. They shook hands. But the moment was already gone. And so was control. Within minutes of the show ending, clips began to surface, cropped, zoomed, slowed down. Chris standing up. Sunny holding eye contact. The word setup. The word accountability. Twitter lit up first, then everything else. Hashtags split cleanly down the middle, like fault lines. Team Chris versus Sunny was right. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Think pieces raced to be first, not thoughtful. Chris Pratt meltdown on live TV. Sunny Hostin exposes Hollywood silence. Daytime TV crosses the line. Finally, someone says it. Fans dissected every second. His tone. Her phrasing. Who interrupted who? Who deserved grace? Who didn't? Some called Chris brave, finally pushing back against a culture of forced statements. Others called him defensive, fragile, unwilling to listen. Sunny was praised as fearless by some, accused of ambush by others. The nuance vanished almost immediately. Backstage, Chris sat alone in his dressing room, phone face down on the table. He didn't need to look to know what it would say. He replayed the moment over and over, the stand, the words, the admission he didn't know. Part of him felt relief. Another part felt exposed. He wondered if honesty was worth this cost, if silence would have been easier after all. Across town, Sunny rode home in silence, eyes fixed on the city lights sliding past the window. She knew this feeling well, the backlash, the accusations, the praise that felt just as heavy. She believed in the question she'd asked. She still did. But she also wondered if the delivery had drowned out the point. If conversation had lost a collision. By nightfall, celebrities weighed in without weighing in. Likes, vague posts, cryptic stories. Some defended Chris's right to boundaries. Others echoed Sunny's insistence on responsibility. News panels replayed the clip endlessly, pausing on Chris's face mid-sentence like it held the answer to everything. And the audience? They couldn't look away. Because beneath the celebrity and the studio lights, the moment hit something raw and unresolved. It wasn't really about Chris Pratt. It wasn't really about Sunny Hostin. It was about who gets to decide what's enough. About whether silence is safety or surrender. About whether public figures owe the public their voice or their privacy. Daytime TV had always thrived on control. Timed segments. Gentle tension. Safe conclusions. But this time, there was no tidy wrap-up, no lesson neatly tied with a bow. Just a crack in the surface big enough for everyone to see through. The next morning, ratings spiked. The show issued a carefully worded statement about meaningful dialogue. Chris's team said he stood by his words. Sunny returned to the desk, composed, unwavering. Life moved forward, but the moment didn't fade. It lingered. In comment sections. In group chats. In the quiet thought people had later that night when the noise died down and the question remained. What would you have done in that chair? Was it courage or deflection? Accountability or coercion? A line crossed or a line finally drawn? That's where this story really lives, with you. Now tell us what you think. Whose side were you on, and why? Drop your opinion in the comments. We're reading every one. And if you want more explosive, cinematic moments where the mask slips and the truth hits live, subscribe to Prime Tale right now. Because some stories aren't meant to stay controlled, and we're here to tell them.